Star Wars Young Jedi Knights Delusions of Grandeur Chapter 14. The rising star dipped and loped and cavorted in its pilot's exuberance as Rabba flew it across the jungle canopy of Kashyyyk. Loie didn't have to use his Jedi senses to see how excited she was about coming back home. He couldn't wait to see his sister's face when she saw her best friend again. Of course, of all Rabba's friends and relations, Sierra alone knew that the long-lost Wookiee was actually alive, but even Sierra didn't know that Loie and Rabba were coming for a visit. He bared his teeth in a gleeful grin as Rabba accelerated, flipped the little scar skimmer over, and flew briefly upside down just above the dense canopy. The trees were so thick and interlocked that the thoroughfares, as wide as highways, had been chopped through the treetops so that beasts of burden could walk from place to place. Deep beneath the rooftop of branches lay the dark underworld where few Wookiees ever ventured. Rabba flipped the rising star over again and wrangled the tiny craft's airfoils back and forth so that the skimmer ruffled the leaves below it, like a calamarian sea skit dancing across green waves. Then finally they headed toward the vast treetop city that they had both grown up. The crowns of the tallest wisher trees rose above the canopy level like islands in an ocean. Wooden platforms at various heights served as gathering areas and landing pads. High-tech facilities such as computer fabrication labs and the planetary traffic control tower had been erected in some of the larger trees, while more distant tree clusters served as dwelling for the Wookiee families. Rabba chose an open landing platform high in the outskirts of their city. Clinching the red band tight around her head, Rabba bounded out of the star skimmer as full of cheerful energy as Loie had ever seen her. She made Loie promise not to tell anyone, not even Sierra, of her presence. Instead, she planned to make her way unobtrusively to the great tree arena, where she would register a request for an all-city meeting. She would let the Wookiee registry spread the word for her, and then make her surprise reappearance tonight with everyone present. Rabba had much to do between then and now, and it had to be done just right. The sleek, dark Wookiee woman hurried off after Loie agreed to urge his sister and family to attend the gathering. It was a long way to Loie's house yet, but he was in no hurry. His parents, Kelebawa and Makrokor, were probably still at work at the computer fabrication facility. After hours of cramped flight, he wanted to stretch his legs by striding along the spicy-smelling treetop thoroughfare. In the morning, the sun was warm and the breeze fragrant. It felt good to be home. He went to see his sister first. A distinguished-looking older Wookiee with yellow pointed fur pointed Loie towards the flight training area where Sierra took classes to become a star pilot. He leapt and climbed from branch to branch till he reached the leafy field above which Sierra flew her training vessel. He looked upward, watching her ship make one long dive and then another pass. With no slight amusement, he noted that Sierra's piloting style was very much like Rabba's. The two had been fast friends for years, after all. The refurbished Y-Wing had cramped instructor station built into the compartment where the gunner formerly sat. From the speed of which Sierra banked and looped, however, one could never have guessed that her practice vessel was a discontinued model now used primarily for training. Sierra simulated a perfect reverse throttle hop against an imaginary opponent, followed by an under-split, then disengaged after performing a flawless talon roll. Her exhaust nozzles glowed orange-red as she roared back toward the treetop city. With her lesson finished, Sierra brought the Y-Wing to the landing platform low and fast, barely a meter above its polished surface. No doubt showing off. She pulled up into a steep climb, looped around, and landed with a micro-caliber precision directly in the center. Her ship's repulsor jets let out a hiss like a nervous sigh of relief. Sierra popped the Y-Wing canopy and sprang out of the cockpit. Because she was pumped with adrenaline from her flying antics, she did not notice her brother at first, but Loie had a front-row seat for an amusing exchange. Sierra raked long fingers through her ruffled Patrick fur, while her instructor, a portly human whom Loie did not recognize, levered himself slowly and painfully out of the rear compartment. The man's face was flushed and indignant, and his voice shook when he spoke. "Why, in my day, young lady," he began. "Wookiee," Sierra corrected him, growling in her own language. "Yes, well, Wookiee, then. In my day, trainees understood how to follow instructions, and they did it politely with a 'yes, Captain Thorne,' or a salute. No grandstanding." Sierra reminded Captain Thorne that she was not in the military, nor did she ever intend to be. Then, with slight deliberation, she pointed out that she had actually followed every one of his instructions. She had simply added a bit of embellishment. Precisely, Thorn said. Embellishment. I did not tell you to embellish. But he had told her not to embellish, Syria insisted in a mild voice, wrinkling her black nose. Lowly, nearly shaking with laughter, chose his moment to heave himself up to the landing platform where Sister could see him. Syria uttered a yelp of happy surprise and crossed the platform on 2 long leaps. She threw herself into her brother's arms, and the 2 Wookiees set up a joyous series of barks, yowls, and chuffing laughter. Captain Thorn flushed a deep red all the way to the scalp that showed through his thinning hair, and stalked off the platform, mumbling something about needing a pay raise. Sierra wanted to know why Loey had come unannounced. When he arrived, why his little translating droid had not accompanied him, how he had gotten to Kashyyyk, and whether or not she had heard anything from Rabba. Loey tried to explain again without giving Rabba a secret, but Sierra gave a pleased growl, not noticing how he had evaded her questions. His timing was perfect, she assured him, though she cast an annoyed look in the direction of her departed instructor. She hoped that Loey could stay a little while and watch how well she learned to fly, since she, too, had completed her rite of passage down in a dangerous underworld. She had so much to tell him, it might take days. As early evening, Loey and Sierra made their way to the amphitheater just outside the treetop city. Their parents were already there, along with half the city's inhabitants. Sierra complained they would have more fun staying home and playing combat simulation games than their entertainment unit. Why did the sector which she wanted attend an open city forum in the great tree arena? Such meetings are always dull and never had any relevance to the younger members of society. With a mysterious cocked brow, Loey hastened to assure sisters that she would find this particular meeting very interesting. Sierra threw him a doubtful glance, but did not argue further. They chose seating branches high in the amphitheater where they could get the best view. The sun sank below the horizon of the sprawling forest, and the sky grew rich and dark overhead. Loey had a hard time distinguishing between the soft rustling of Wookiees finding their seats and the whisper of leaves in the evening wind. Sierra grew restless for the meeting to start. Loey began to worry that something had gone wrong, or Rabba had changed her mind. Maybe she had now reconsidered her confession and was ashamed that, after all, to tell how she had staged her own death. But then, just as a few stars brightened in the sky, a shaft of blazing light stabbed upward from the center of the stage. In the center of the light stood a chocolate-furred Wookiee female, wearing her own dazzling belt made from siren fiber, fresh siren fiber. Sierra nearly fell backward off her branch in surprise, and Loey fared no better. He had known Rabba had set this meeting, but the implications of her belt were enough to stun him as much as everyone else in the assembly. Surprised murmurs of recognition spread through the crowd, and Loey heard Rabba's name repeated over and over. Sierra glared at her brother accusingly. He had kept this a secret from her. Before Loey could explain why he had kept silent about his friend's return, Rabba raised her arms to quiet the crowd. In a clear, loud voice, she introduced herself so that there could be no mistaking who she was. Next, a beam of light in which Rabba stood split into 100 smaller rays that opened and spread themselves flat on the stage, like the petals of some gigantic fiery flower with her at its center. She told everyone how she had been all but dead after attempting her rite of passage, and how the Diversity Alliance had given her back in her life. In much the same way, she said, the Empire's enslavement of Wookiees have taken the life of Kashyyyk. To a great extent, Wookiees still enslaved for humankind in one way or another. Loey sat listening uneasily. He had not known Rabba was going to make this a political speech. Sierra, though, seemed fully enthralled. Rabba continued, aliens of all species had suffered similar treatment since before the rise of Emperor Palpatine at the hands of humans. And the most shameful part, she said, spreading her arms to the crowd, was that none of it would have been possible if non-human peoples hadn't allowed it to happen. The Diversity Alliance and its visionary leader, Nola Tarkona, were ready to show the way. If Wookiees, Talls, and Biss, and Twakes, all their species would band together, unified under one leader, they would never need fear the domination of humans again. She urged anyone who was willing to help to send a message to the Diversity Alliance to go to Nola Tarkona himself and Ryloth, or talk to their friends into joining the cause as well. Wookiee murmurs ran through the crowd again, this time sounds of approval. Rabba's voice grew so louder that her words became more persuasive. Each of the glowing rays around her shattered into a million tiny shards of light, surrounding her like a swarm of phosphofleas. Individually, Rabba explained each of them was no more than one of these tiny specks. Alone, they could do nothing, but together. She raised her arms high over her head, and the phosphoflea specks of light coalesced into 100 dazzling rays. They could change the galaxy. The rays snapped together again in a single brilliant beacon that sheared upward toward the stars. Then the stage went completely dark. Wookiees on every side of the branches shook to show their approval. Silent, swept in by their emotion, Loie and Sierra joined in. Suddenly, without warning, Rabba stood there with them, out in the amphitheater seats. With a roar of joy, Sierra hurled herself upon her friend, pounding Rabba on the back and growling happily. Rabba chuckled her own delight to see Sierra again as she showed off her glossy new belt. Unable to restrain his curiosity any longer, Loie asked Rabba when and how she had gotten her trophy. The chocolate-furred Wookiee flashed her flanks with a wide grin, pleased by his surprise. She had gone down to the world below only that afternoon, and had just before returning home to visit her stunned parents. Rabba had been hiding for almost a year, running away, and now she wanted to have her trophy before she showed herself again. Completing the fateful mission that had been interrupted so long ago had made her return even more dramatic. But her expression grew serious again. Rabba looked shrewdly to her two friends. She needed to return to Ryloth that very night, she said. She had to report to Nola Tarcona and the Diversity Alliance. There was no time to waste. Her eyes burned with intensity Loie could not entirely understand. Then Rabba eagerly clasped both on their shoulders. If Loie and Sierra would accompany her to Ryloth for just a few days, she would tell them all of her adventures in the lower levels and her battle at the Siren plant. Before Loie could consider the question, Sierra enthusiastically agreed for both of them.